A lot of people will have these blocks. They'll say, I don't believe in God or Jesus or Christianity because I think it was all made up. It's a myth or a fairy tale or a legend. They'll say that Jesus is just another mythical god pieced together from other mythical gods that already existed, such as Mithras, Horus, Dionysus, and others, or that there's really no evidence in the first couple hundred years that proves he even existed, or that some guy named Jesus, not the Son of God, probably did exist, but everything else about him was made up and added on later. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about these, but I will say this. For the first, this idea that Jesus was just an amalgamation of other ancient mythical gods who, according to this, had virgin births, were baptized, had 12 disciples, performed the same miracles, and were crucified, died, and resurrected as Savior of the world. Well, none of this is true. These claims can all be traced back to a couple guys in the 18 and 1900s who had no evidence. Actually, all the evidence we do have shows these ancient mythical gods were really nothing like Jesus at all. Which is why every scholar, archaeologist, and Egyptologist dismissed these claims a long time ago. So we can throw this one out, and this is the one that's all over the internet. For the second, this idea that there's no evidence within the first few centuries that proves Jesus even existed, well, there's plenty of evidence. Just open a Bible, New Testament. Those are all first-century accounts written by a bunch of very different guys who were all alive when Jesus was alive. There's also non-Christian evidence from Jewish and Roman historians, from those who are opposed to Jesus, and from those who didn't even like him. But those who hold this view argue that all the evidence was either forged, altered, or made up. There's really no evidence of Alexander the Great until 400 years after he died. But he existed, right? Even if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, Son of God, you can't just throw away all the evidence. That's too easy. Which is why today nearly all historians, whether Christians or not, accept that Jesus existed. Bam. Which brings us to the last one. That some radical preacher named Jesus probably did exist, but everything else about him was religious embellishment at best or completely and totally made up at worst. Some say it was made up by his disciples, the Romans, by Constantine, by a bunch of rich white guys in Rome who wanted a lot of power, or just by sitting around the campfire telling stories over and over and over again. Well, the earliest evidence of Christianity that's pretty solid shows it was already fairly well established by around 64 AD. And most of the New Testament is thought to have been written between the 50s and the 70s, so we know it couldn't have been made up after this. And it's unlikely that his disciples made it up because, well, they all died very brutal, violent deaths for it. And yes, people die all the time for things they believe are true. But would you die for something you knew was a lie? So that leaves about 20 years of embellishing stories around the campfire to turn just some preacher named Jesus into the Son of God